Hello, and welcome to Hadassah Magazine Presents, a program and podcast for those who love Hadassah and want more, and for those who have never heard of the magazine and are looking for stimulating conversations with acclaimed Jewish authors, thinkers, celebrities, and culinary stars. I'm your host, Lisa Hostein, the executive editor of Hadassah Magazine. I'm delighted to be in conversation today with Mary Morris, an award-winning author whose latest book, The Red House, is simultaneously a chilling mystery and a disturbing exploration of a little-known aspect of Holocaust history set in Italy. It's a beautifully written, intensely engaging novel that our reviewer described as a penetrating psychological narrative. Thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today. If this is your first Hadassah Magazine Presents program, a special welcome. And I hope you take the time to learn more about Hadassah and the life-changing work it does to heal those in Israel and around the world. If you're not already a member, please consider joining so you can enjoy the magazine, which is free with membership, as well as all the wonderful programming the magazine and the rest of Hadassah provides. And of course, your donations are always welcome and valued. Links for both membership and contributions are in the chat box, as is a link to purchase The Red House, which I highly recommend you do if you haven't already. We welcome audience questions throughout the conversation. Please be sure to write them in the Q&A. The chat is reserved for information we want to distribute to you. And now for a fuller introduction to our featured guest. Mary Morris is the author of numerous novels, including Gateway to the Moon, 3 collections of short stories, and 5 travel memoirs, including All the Way to the Tigers and what has become a travel classic, Nothing to Declare, Memoirs of a Woman Traveling Alone. Her stories and essays have appeared in such places as The Atlantic, the Paris Review, and the New York Times. The recipient of the Rome Prize in Literature and the 2016 Anisfield Wolf Award for Fiction, Morris taught for many years at Princeton University and Sarah Lawrence College. The Red House represents her 3rd novel in which she explores buried or lost histories. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for being here and congratulations on this book.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me. And thank you to Hadassah for doing this. I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. So I want to start with a pretty simple question. I want you to give a synopsis of The Red House. I like to ask the author to do that because you're, after all, the creator, and it's interesting to see how you describe the book. So briefly, without too many spoilers.
Right, no spoilers. Laura Smith is she's a wannabe artist, but she's actually a real estate stager. When she was 12 years old, Laura's mother disappeared without a trace. Laura lived with her father and sister in New Jersey. And for the last 30 years, her mother has been missing. There's a Detective Hendricks, who has been on the case of the missing mother for many years. He and Laura have had a complicated relationship. And when the novel opens, Laura has received a phone call from Detective Hendricks after many years. And rather than return the phone call, she decides to flee to Italy. She has a marriage on the rocks, and she goes back to Italy, where she was born and where she lived for the first 6 years of her life, to try to find some trace of her mother's story. She knows very little about her mother. She believes she was an orphan. She was orphaned in Naples. That is really all Laura has to go by, except the town that she was born in, which is Brindisi, Italy.
So it is a mystery on top of everything
yes.
else. But clearly it's part Holocaust literature.
It is.
Which has become this amazingly popular form of literature. It amazes me all the time. Every day, every week, we get another press release about another Holocaust fiction, Holocaust literature. And some writers devote all their writing to that. But
Right.
This is new for you. This is a new theme. And you have an interesting story about how you stumbled upon the story. So tell us about that and what ultimately inspired you to pursue it as a novel.
Well, let me just start off by saying, my family's origins are Russian Jews. I always felt I wanted to write about the Holocaust, but I didn't feel I owned that narrative, if you know what I mean. I'm going to tell you sort of a little story about what happened. But, as a writer, there are stories that we choose to write about. And then there are stories that choose you. And I feel that this is a story that chose me. So I'm going to give a little bit of a rambling narrative. And if it goes on too long, feel free to interrupt me or stop me. But I'm going to just try to cut to the chase here. So for 20 years, my husband and I did house exchanges. We swapped our house for strangers' houses. And that's how we traveled the world with our daughter. After 20 years, I decided it was enough. It's a lot of work. You have to clean your house. You have to do a lot of things. I said, no more. And literally the next day, we got a beautiful offer for this farmhouse in southern Italy in Puglia. And Puglia is south of Naples. It's about 4-ish hours south of Naples. And I'd never been there before. It was a beautiful offer. And we went, and it was fantastic. And we'd been there a little while when the family lived in the area. And one of the members of the family called me and said, I want to take you to this town called Adabellobello. Well, as you mentioned, Lisa, I'm a part-time travel writer. I mean, I have a little side hustle there in travel writing. And I knew about Adabellobello. I knew that it was a very touristy place, and I didn't really want to go. But I couldn't be rude. I had to be polite. So I agreed to go. And sure enough, I mean, Adabellobello looks like a town designed for hobbits. I mean, it's little conical shaped houses. It is very touristy. There are, buses and, people walking around with duck umbrellas and tour groups and all of it. And after about a half an hour, I said to our hosts that I was tired and I wanted to just rest I wanted to rest. And I bought a gelato and I went and sat in a little courtyard. And in the courtyard, this is Hadassah, so I guess I can say there was a verstunken little tree in front of me, not far from me, a very little tree. And the tree had this big plaque around it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. The tree has a plaque around it. I wonder what the plaque says. I'm a curious person. And I went up, and the plaque was written in 2 languages, both of which one I read very well, which is Italian, and one I can work my way through, which is Hebrew. And the plaque said, I'm going to not probably get this exactly right, from the people of Jerusalem to the people of Adabellobello for your kindness and generosity during the racial period. And I was like, what could this strange little town have to do with the racial, Mussolini and the Holocaust and, Italian Jews and all of that. I mean, I knew enough of the history to know that that's what they were referring to. And that set me on this search that took a number of years. And I won't go into finally how I found why the plaque was there, but, a lot of the book for me was the discovery of why that plaque was there. And to be straight with you, no one in the town knew why the plaque was there. They didn't know what it referred to. They didn't know anything about it. And I guess since I'm rambling, I'm going to tell you for 2 more minutes. Okay. I filed it away. I was working on other things. Just before COVID, we went back to Italy. My neighbor was walking his dog. He said, what are you doing? I said, we're on our way to Italy. This is before we went. And I said, che bene, dove va? And he started talking to me in Italian, and I didn't know he spoke Italian. And I started speaking to him in Italian. And he told me they were Roman Jews and that their family had been sequestered during the Holocaust. And I said, do you know anything about Adabellobello? And he sent me a bunch of articles. He said he didn't, but he sent me a bunch of articles. And I like to joke that my husband has an annoying habit of sleeping on long haul flights, and I'm wide awake. But I downloaded all these articles and I was reading them. And at one point I found a footnote that said on the outskirts of Adabellobello was a detention camp called the Red House, La Casa Rosa. So I kind of knew I had to find it.
Such serendipity, right?
Yeah.
And so the Red House was an actual building in this.
It is an actual building.
Right.
And in fact, so we found it. It took a long time. It's not on any, now it is. It wasn't then. We're talking 6 years ago. It wasn't on any route that people would find it. It looks like a giant red, and it looks like a concentration camp. And we got there, and then I called the family member that I was friendly with, and she said, I think I know someone who can help you learn about this. And it's the one guy in all of Italy who had the key to the padlock to that building, like literally the only guy. and they were about to turn it into a discotheque.
Mm.
So, and then someone in the Italian Historical Society said, wait a minute, I don't think that can be a discotheque because I think it's had other histories, that building.
Mm.
So it was an agricultural building. It was an agricultural school. It was an orphanage. And then during the Second World War, during the Mussolini period from 1940 to 43, it was a detention center for Jews.
Mm. Mm. So, how did you land on centering your story around that?
So that's a really interesting question. So I had the knowledge, but I didn't have the story. Do you know what I mean? Like I knew, and I was able to go into this building. I don't think anyone had really walked in there in 70 years,
Mm.
except for a very, very few number of people, including the person who had the key to the padlock of the door. Um, it was, I walked in that building and I was just chilled to the bone, but I didn't really have a story. I didn't know what the story was. I knew I wanted to write about it, but I didn't know what it was.
Mm.
So because I'm a storyteller, I'm going to tell you one other little story, which is a little dark, but I'm in my office now and you see behind me, there's a big bulletin board with lots of scrap paper and things like that. And I collect all this stuff. And in 2005, I was in the Memphis airport on a book tour and something fell behind me. And I turned around and it was a TSA line. It was early TSA, and a man had dropped a button, a large, like a political button. And I picked it up and there was a woman's face on it. And it said, "Have you seen this woman?" And I went to hand it back to him. And he said, "No, you keep that. That's my wife. And she's gone missing. And I give those to people anyway. So I want you to keep that."
Mm.
And I didn't know what to do with it. And I brought it home with me in 2005 and I put it on my bulletin board. And in 2019, when I sat down to write The Red House, I turned around and that button with the woman's face was behind me. And her name was Viola. And I named the missing mother Viola in the novel. So it just, it was literally a shard of something that I collected in 2005 and didn't start to write it until, I can't do the math, but I guess it's 14 years later. I guess I did the math.
Not only did you do the math, but you gave us such an interesting window into the process of a novelist, right? How these stories just come about in all kinds of mysterious ways.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much to unpack here. There's the powerful yet disturbing mother-daughter relationship, other family dynamics, what happened to the Jews of Italy, intergenerational trauma, art as an expression of grief and loss and memory. There's just so much in this rich book. So let's start with the mother-daughter dynamic.
Sure.
It's not too much of a spoiler. You already talked about how she disappeared. And there's Laura who lost her mother, disappeared when she was 12 years old.
Right.
So tell us what in your mind is most important about these two women and their relationship.
Well, so Laura has lived with a maternal abandonment for 30 years. And when Laura gets the phone call from the detective, this is not a spoiler because it's on the first 2 pages of the book, or 3 pages anyway. She realizes that she's the same age that her mother was when her mother disappeared. Her mother disappeared when she was 42 and Laura's 42. And Laura has never made peace. I mean, how can you make peace with something like this? I mean, I hate to contemporize it, but I think about the Nancy Guthrie family and this missing mother that's all over the news. And how do you make peace with a missing person like that, particularly a mother? Maternal abandonment is a theme that has been important to me for various reasons. My mother didn't abandon me in those ways, but she was a complicated person. She did tend to lose me in stores. I was lost quite a bit, and I often had to ask people to help me find her. So, I mean, it's just a theme that's been important to me, and I think it's a very powerful theme for all of us. That there's so many levels of it, and I think that what Laura needed to do in the novel was realize that, mothers aren't perfect, fathers aren't perfect. She had to make peace with whatever her mother's story was, and if you read the novel, you'll know that she really knew virtually nothing of her mother's story, that it's a novel of discovery.
Hmm.
And hopefully the reader will uncover Laura's story as they're reading it, and to be honest with you, as I was writing it, I didn't entirely know where it was going. So, so
I was going to actually, well, we'll get back to that. We'll get back
yeah.
to that point a little bit later. But I do want to ask you, writing about you have so much out there, novels, memoirs. Writing about Jewish themes is relatively new for you after such a long and distinguished career. And your last
Mhm.
book, Gateway to the Moon, in which you explore the Inquisition in Portugal and Conversos, Hidden Jews, is one other example. But tell us about your own Jewish journey.
Well, as we spoke earlier before this program, my parents named me Mary because my father particularly didn't want people to know I was Jewish by my name. And most people think I'm Irish. I'm married to an O'Connor, and many people have asked Larry if I converted for him because they think he's Jewish. So it's kind of a funny situation. This a story I like to tell was maybe I was 17 or 18. We were sitting at the dinner table, and um, somebody said a Hebrew word, and I said, "What does that mean?" I can't remember what the word was, and my father goes, "You don't know what that means? I mean, that's just anyone would know that what that word means." And he turned to my mother and he said, "Didn't we send her to Hebrew school?" And my mother said, "No, we didn't send her to Hebrew school." And they both looked at each other, and I was like, wow, like, do you guys not realize that, like, I didn't really have a Jewish upbringing of any sort? And I think I was about 18 and kind of going off to college, and I decided, I was going to make some personal discoveries. I wanted to know my family. I wanted to know where we came from. I wanted to know more about our history. Um, I think one of the things about being Jewish that I've learned is that, forgive me if this sounds dark, but we don't know where all the bones are buried. We don't know where the ancestors are. I can't trace my ancestry back the way, I know I have friends whose family came over in the Mayflower and they can go back to that, but I can't, go back very far. So I just began a journey. I learned Hebrew. I learned that I have family in Israel, and I visited them in 1968 when I was living in Paris, and the Sorbonne was closed. And I thought, well, I'll go meet my Israeli family. And I did that. And so, it's been a journey for me. I'm imperfect in my learning, but it's an important part of who I am and my identity.
I don't know if there's such a thing as imperfect in your learning. Like any learning is
Yeah.
good.
Well, just to go
So
back for 1 second to the whole question of buried history. So my history I felt was a little buried. And so I've been interested in these buried histories in Gateway to the Moon and in this novel, and also something I'm working on now. And I'm kind of sort of feel like I'm rounding out a sort of saga of buried histories. So
mm. So I'm curious, is it more the Jewish history that has driven you or the buried stories within that history or both?
well, I don't think I can separate them. I think it's kind of both. I think that um, that's a really good question. I think they're conjoined, you know. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about your research for this book. You clearly did a lot in
Mhm.
Italy and the experience of Italian Jews during World War II. Can you give us, I mean, this isn't really fair, but can you give us just a little summary? Because I think the Jews of Italy are not one segment of the Jewish community that is studied or well known. And
Right.
I learned a lot just reading your book. And that's what I love about historical fiction is that, especially when it's a good, well-written story and a really interesting piece of history that I'm not familiar with. So it's complex, what happened to the Jews of Italy. So can you just kind of summarize that a little bit and talk about how you came to understand and learn about it?
Um, so remember I told you that this gentleman took me around the Red House, and I'm a very good I'm a good researcher, and I I had a little notebook. I'm trying to just see if I have one on my desk here. I don't, but I keep these little notebooks with me, and everything he said I was writing down. I was writing it down, writing it down, writing it down. And when we got on the flight, and I was so moved by being in the Red House and this whole experience, and it was very powerful to me. And I'm on the plane, and I realize I've lost this little notebook, and I've never found it again. Um, And my husband said to me, well, tell me, what do you remember from the conversation that you had with this gentleman? Carlo was his name. I said, I remember that they were cold, they were hungry, and the people who lived in, they meaning the detainees were cold. When you go to the Red House, if you go there, um, there are no windows. It's bars. There's it's open to the elements, right? And I stood in one of those windows and I watched birds flying in and out, and I was like, and he said, "This is what it was." So it was cold. They were hungry, and they worked in the town. And so if you were in detention or exile like that, and you had some kind of profession, this wasn't only true with the Red House. This is also true in Carlo Levy's Christ Stopped at Eboli. He's a doctor, and I think he does medical work in the town. He wants to be a painter, but anyway, that's another 1930s novel about Jews. He was an anarchist, not a detainee for that reason. But anyway, so if you were a doctor, if you were a lawyer, if you were a nurse, you would work in the town. And the townspeople of Adabellobello, I mean, it was anyway, a very primitive place. I mean, you're not on the tourist trail. Like, if you don't speak Italian and you're not with a tour group, I don't know how you get around, So it's just very complicated so I think what happened was when Jews arrived there, that the people didn't know what to expect.
And they were sent from the north, right? So,
Yes.
right,
So,
they were sent from the
yes,
north.
all the Jews who were sent to the Red House between 1940 and 1943, what were called foreign nationals. And I'll explain that in a second before I might lose my train of thought on the other question, which I may have lost my train of thought on it. But anyway, just in terms of the research itself, so there's one book written about the Red House. It's in Italian, and I read that as best I could. And then there are a lot of books about Italian Jews, and there's a lot of Italian Jewish history and Italian Jewish Holocaust history, and a lot of different views. Like, were there good Italian? Were the Italians good? Were they better to the Jews? Was it a better situation than Germany and Austria? Well, yes, certainly, but it wasn't great, But to answer your question about who went to the Red House between 1940 and 1943, so this might get in the weeds a little bit. I'm not a historian, so I'll just do my best here. When Mussolini declared the racial laws, he revoked the citizenship of all foreign nationals. So if you were a Hungarian Jew, if you were a Romanian Jew, whatever, and you had come to Italy, and if you had gotten your citizenship before January 1st, 1919, you kept your citizenship. But if you had gotten your citizenship on January 2nd, 1919, all citizenships were revoked. So if you were a foreign national, again, not Italian Jews, like if we've seen the movie The Finzi Contini, those are the Jews who may have lived in, for hundreds of years, their families and generations. But I'm talking about people who had immigrated there within a 20, immigration obviously is a topic on many people's minds. So there are people who had immigrated there. If it was under 20 years to the day, your citizenship was revoked, your passport was stamped alien, and you were subject to exile and ultimately deportation. So most of the Jews who were sent to the Red House, I would say maybe even all of them, were foreign nationals who came from the north, meaning north of Rome, and were sent to the south. Now, there were a lot of these detention centers. They're in Calabria and other parts of southern Italy. I don't have the names at the tip of my finger, but you could certainly look it up. And so they were there. And to be really honest with you, and this is from my research, they did a lot better than the northern Jews or the Jews that were, generationally Italian, because if you were sent to the South, and if you had the good sense to actually stay in the South after 1943, which was when the Allied forces landed in southern Italy, you did okay. And a lot of those Jews finally ultimately emigrated to Palestine, Israel. But north of Rome, that's where the Nazis took over. That's where the deportations began in northern Italy, in Italy. But in the south, the Allied forces, came in through Sicily, through Puglia, up to Naples, and they pushed the Nazis back to Rome. And then the rest of the history we know.
Mm. Mm.
So if it's a good story, which not saying it's a good story, but it's a better story. And, ironically, a number of that's why there are these communities in Calabria, a number of families that were sent there liked it there. They felt safe. Truthfully, there were beaches. It was pleasant enough. In many cases, they were sent there and they had literally nothing, but they made communities for themselves. I mean, they lived in tents. They lived on the beaches. They lived wherever, but they built communities. And some of those communities have, I forget the name of it, but there is a community. There's actually a rabbi, an American rabbi, who is the rabbi in this town in Calabria, that's kind of on a hilltop. And I'm sorry if I can't remember the name, but I can't remember the name, but you can look it up.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's a different history, and as I said, I'm not a German Jew. Those are not my roots, and I felt I could connect to this story in a different way, maybe because I do speak Italian, and I've traveled to Italy a lot. And one tiny factoid that I learned the other day, literally just Googling mindlessly, was that if Jews share DNA, the Jews share more DNA with Italians than any other nationality in Europe. Isn't that interesting? And we're talking going back, not just, recent DNA, like if you do your DNA.
That's interesting. That is interesting. Like even more than Spain or Portugal, or that's interesting.
Greece and Italy more than Spain and Portugal.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So was there anything in your research as you started getting deeper and deeper into it that particularly surprised you?
So I'm gonna be really honest. I tried to dig deep into research, and there were certainly things that surprised me. But I read this tiny little bit about when Toni Morrison wrote Beloved. She read a tiny little newspaper clip about a slave who killed her baby rather than let that baby be taken into slavery. And I remember reading, Toni Morrison saying that's all she needed to know. She didn't need to do a deep dive. And a writer who was a very dear friend of mine, Paul Auster, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, he called me one day. He was working on a novel. And he said, I'm writing a novel set in Chicago. He didn't know anything about Chicago. I don't know if he'd even been to Chicago. He said, what can you tell me about Chicago? I said, well, there's the L train. There's the Art Institute and Lake Michigan. He goes, that's all I need to know. And he wrote Moon Palace, which, sold 1 million copies in France alone. And, so, as a storyteller, I don't want to get it wrong. But on the other hand, I don't want the research to take over the storytelling.
That's certainly understandable, and it makes sense. You don't want to get it wrong, but there's such a thing as too much research that bogs you down. Yeah.
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you were quoted in an interview saying that travel informs pretty much everything I do and write about. So on some level, I am always thinking about it. So all of your books, it seems to me, involve some sort of journey. So how and when did travel become such an important part of your life, and how has it influenced your writing?
Well, it's just another really good question. So my mother always wanted to be a traveler. Like my mother always wanted to, I said I had a complicated relationship with my mother, but she always wanted to travel. And when I was a girl, I was quite young, my parents were invited to a suppressed desire ball. I want to throw a suppressed desire ball. You were supposed to go as your secret wish, your secret desire.
Okay.
Okay.
Interesting theme.
Yeah, it's great, right? Maybe we don't have suppressed desires anymore. Maybe we're just all too upfront about our lives and everything. I mean, I don't know. But anyway, suppressed desire ball. And my mother had a degree in fashion from the Art Institute of Chicago. And we're talking about in the 30s. She got a degree in fashion design. But because of the Depression, she worked in the lingerie department at Saks Fifth Avenue until a friend introduced her to my father. And she was 35 years old. So, whatever. So she was a frustrated, she could have been Coco Chanel and, but anyway, but she wanted to travel. She named our first dog Renoir because she wanted a Renoir. She loved France. She was a real Francophile. And when they were invited to this ball, my mother went into this kind of trance, and she had a mannequin in the basement, and she got all this taffeta and what do you call it, fishnet, and got all these brochures and all these things. And I remember going down to the basement and watching her like build this costume on this mannequin. And I would go down there and she would say to me, Mary, maybe I was 6 or 7 years old. She goes, where should I put the Taj Mahal? Where should the Eiffel Tower go? And I was like, I didn't know what she was talking about. And meanwhile, the funny side to this story was my father was very handsome, but he was very bald. And they used to call him Greer and Cary because he looked a lot like Cary Grant and she looked like Greer Garson, or they like to think of themselves that way. But anyway, my dad didn't have a costume. And just a short time before the ball, my dad's barber said to him, my dad was complaining about the costume ball and what he was going to do with the costume ball. And the barber said, why don't you go as a man with hair? So my dad got a toupee, which he wore for the rest of his life, and he looked very dashing always. Meanwhile, my mother, the night of the ball, she stood at the top of the stairs. I remember seeing my father in a tuxedo and with hair, which I'd never seen, and my mother in this costume of the world. She had made herself, her skirts were the oceans. She had sewn all of these brochures into the dress. She made a hat that was a circling like a globe that with the planets and the earth on it. And I don't know, I've always come back to it. I wrote about it in my first travel book, Nothing to Declare. And my mother always just said, go, see the world. Don't hold back. So that's what I did. No, I'm tired. I mean, I'm not tired tonight. I mean, I'm tired of traveling, but I'm not that tired. I'd still go pretty much anywhere if I can.
Well, I share that sense of travel and adventure, and I haven't done nearly as much as you, but there's still a lot of places left on my bucket list.
Right.
So you've also been quoted as saying, I write the same way I travel, basically with no itinerary, no roadmaps, detours are always welcome. So this book certainly included many detours on a journey that Laura didn't know where it would take her. So what was she looking for? She didn't know what she was looking for or how it would turn out. So did you know how this story would turn out when you started writing it?
No, I mean, I don't write with a roadmap. I don't even know. I believe you that I said that and I wrote that, but of course I can't remember that I said that or wrote that because I don't backtrack. I'm a little bit more like a shark, and I'm not really a shark, but I mean, I move forward, in life. I don't know. I guess the simple answer is no. I didn't know where the story was going to take me. I knew that Laura was going to search for her mother. I knew it would be a novel of discovery. I didn't really know what she'd find. You did ask me about research. I did a lot of research about Naples. So the Naples material in the book is very heavily researched. I mean, it's all research, but it's not, the story. I don't build a story around research, if that makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
But, you mentioned Gateway to the Moon. So there's a moment in Gateway to the Moon that I don't really want to give away, but there's a character named Elena in Gateway to the Moon. And my editor kept calling me up and saying, Mary, I love this book, but take Elena out of the book. She doesn't belong in the book. I don't know why she's in the book. And I said, no, she belongs in the book. But I truthfully didn't know why she was in the book either. Until, for those of you who've read the book, and I don't want to give it away, there's a moment of realization in the novel that I didn't realize it until I wrote it. And I literally had to walk away from my desk and I said, that is why she's in the book. Mm-hmm. So, as Flannery O'Connor said, unless it's a surprise for the writer, it won't be a surprise for the reader.
Hmm. And do you
So
think,
I kind of believe that. I mean, I don't outline, I don't have a roadmap. Um, I never travel with an itinerary. I don't, I don't, um, I don't want to, there's a part of me that thinks, oh, I should do like, a tours sometimes because tours seem like helpful ways to travel, but I just can't do tours. I can't have people tell me information. I need to discover. I've always been a person who wants to discover, for better or for worse.
well, it's certainly interesting and unpredictable that way for sure.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
So Viola learns to paint while at the Red House Detention Center, and later that becomes an important part of her life. So art was also very central to Laura, who holds on to her mother's paintings. How do you
Mhm.
view art in this particular context, or even in general, as an expression of grief, loss, memory?
Oh, I might have to write some of that down. Art as an expression of grief, loss, and memory.
Yes.
Wow.
Because it seems that all of those themes are resonant related to the art in this instance. At least that's how I interpreted it.
well, I guess I would say that for me also, writing and stories are also about grief, loss, and memory. And they're very intertwined. I mean, my mother, I mean, I look at art all the time. I have a minor watercolor practice that I love to do just for fun. The visual and the mental, emotional memory, it's all kind of intertwined for me. Um, I mean, art for me is much a part of grief and loss as it is love and joy. I can't separate those things out for myself. I will say something that often surprises people, but I love to share it in terms of process. Um, when I'm working on a novel, such as this one, for example, or Gateway to the Moon, particularly, I print different time periods and different characters' voices on different colored paper.
Hmm.
So if there's a present time story, if there's a past time story, if there's a different narrator, if Laura comes back into the picture, like maybe Laura is green and maybe Tommaso is blue, and maybe there are other characters who are other colors. And I will remember the house in Puglia that I went to when I discovered the Red House. Well, I was working on Gateway to the Moon there, and I had 75 chapters that I didn't know the order of, but I had printed them all on different colored paper.
Hmm.
And I got up early one morning and I was wandering around. We had a very large place to ourselves, and I found a room with a ping pong table in it. And Larry came down in the morning with his first coffee, and I was taking the net off the ping pong table, and he said, "Oh my God, a ping pong table! Don't take the net off." I said, "No, no, we're not going to play ping pong on it. I'm going to use it." And I spread out all the different colored paper, 75 chapters in different colors, and moved them around till I liked the way the colors looked. So maybe it's a form of, I don't know if you call it kinesthesiology or synesthesia. I don't know. There's a word for it, but I can't remember.
Hmm.
But I like the sort of color palette, the idea of a patchwork of a book.
Hmm. Well, that sounds like a roadmap that you were setting for yourself there with color roads, but interesting, very
Mhm.
interesting process. Again, a window into your inner workings. You have indicated that you are working on a new book. Um, a lot of writers don't like to divulge their next project, but I'm curious to know if you'd like to give us a hint about what the next book is.
I don't mind that because I literally finished a draft of it 2 days ago, and I'm very excited about it. And
Wow.
I wrote it kind of in a fever dream. Um, so Gateway to the Moon is about the crypto Jews of New England, but of the New Mexico, the secret Jews. This is about a buried history, a buried Holocaust history. And I decided after those two books that I wasn't going to do another book about buried histories. But anyway, about 7 years ago, my daughter bought a cabin in the Catskills, and she was interested in it, and she asked us to go up and look at it, and we were going to talk her out of it because we thought it was, I don't know, we didn't think it was a good idea for whatever reason. And we went up there, and it was really beautiful, really isolated, not Borscht Belt kind of thing, just a very on a mountain, very desolate place. And we went into this one little room, and on the table there were all of these artifacts, and they were Jewish artifacts. It was a menorah and a Haggadah and a photo album. And the guy who was selling the cabin, who didn't know anything about the objects really, I was looking at the album and he said, "Oh, they all died. Everyone in there died." And I just was like taken aback. And when they bought the cabin, he gave me the Haggadah.
Hmm.
And the Haggadah is from Vienna, 1927. And I just, again, it's a story I couldn't walk away from. So the novel is set in this cabin, and it's the story of the generations who've lived in the cabin. And of course, there's a Holocaust theme.
Hmm. So interesting. We've
So
written a lot about the Catskills, the Jewish history, the more recent history, and it's a very popular theme. So I'm sure that will do well.
good to know.
So that so that would be your third book with the Jewish theme.
Yes.
So I've seen you quoted several times saying, quote, "I'm not a Jewish writer per se." So I'm
Mhm.
curious to know what a Jewish writer is in your view, why you've been reluctant to call yourself one, and whether that's maybe changed by now.
That's a really good question. I think what I mean by it is that, so again, I'm interested in these buried histories, right? I'm interested in the things we don't know, not the things we do know. So I like a book I love is Rachel Kaddish's The Weight of Ink, because again, it's this multi-texture, multi-layered. And so I think what I mean when I say that is that, um, I wouldn't probably write about my cranky Jewish family, and I sort of my interest is more in the histories and in the but in this new novel that I'm working on, there's a small component that's Jewish, but also the first lynching that ever happened north of the Mason-Dixon line happened in the town that my daughter is in. D.W. Griffith, the silent filmmaker, made his films down at the base of my daughter's hill. So all these different stories come together, and I think what I mean is that, I feel like this sounds. I don't mean to say this the way it's going to maybe sound. Um, it's not a main theme that I look for, but it's always kind of a piece of a mystery or a puzzle for me. If that make any sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it's choosing you.
Yes, exactly.
What
Exactly.
town does your daughter live in?
It's a little town called Cutterbackville. It's yeah, right. No one knows. It's near.
In what
I
state?
guess it's about 45 minutes from Monticello.
Oh, okay. So it's up in America,
Um,
huh?
half an hour from Port Jervis.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting. So we have some questions from the audience.
yes.
One asked, did you have an opportunity to speak to people who lived in the town where the Red House was located? And if so, did anyone tell you a story about a relative's experience there? And I would even extend that to ask you whether people have learned anything from your research or your book about this.
So the answer is sadly no. I wasn't able to find any people who had lived there or, you know, um, been through this. I talked to people who were tangentially, like my neighbor whose family were Roman Jews, and there's a person at Columbia University. He wrote a wonderful book. I'm trying to remember. I think it's Benevolence and Betrayal. Alexander Stille, about the Jews of Torino. But the answer is no. I have heard from a woman whose family comes from Bari, which is nearby, but she wasn't born there, but she found the book fascinating, and she is very interested in this, as a piece of her history. But the book has not been published in Italy. The Italians think they haven't picked it up. So
I was going to ask you about that. There's not.
yeah. Well, according to my agent, the Italians think that they're the only, with respect to them, that they're the only ones who can really write about Italian history. So
Mm-hmm. Another question. Besides, you've talked a little bit about your next project, but even looking beyond that, besides Italy and the Sephardi Converso communities, are there other Jewish worlds, Jewish populations, areas of migration where you can envision setting a novel?
Um, well, since I don't know how I'm actually getting to the airport tomorrow morning and I have to leave really early, I can't think that far ahead, truthfully. At yeah, actually, you know what? I'm going to answer this. Um, I have an interest in the Maasai people of Kenya, and I we were in Kenya a few years ago, and we had an incredible guide. And when he found out that we were Jewish, he said that there are theories that the um, many of the origin stories, the mythology of the Maasai people are similar to those of the Hebrew people, as he referred to them. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, but the Maasai do this dance where they jump up and down. They jump up and down. And I asked him about the dancing because I saw them dancing. And our guide said, oh, when we were leaving the land of Canaan, we fell into a ditch. And the people who could jump the highest could get out of the ditch and they could walk to where we are now in Kenya. And that's our origin story. And if you look at a map from where Canaan, Israel, basically is, you know, straight down, it is a straight line to Kenya. And I talked to a number of them. I mean, a lot of they have a story that's very similar to Jacob and Esau. They have they have a lot of stories in there, and I had a lot of talk with them, the Maasai, and the ones who could speak English, and a number of them felt that we were mishpacha, and I am kind of interested in that. I mean, I'd have to really go there and spend some time there, and there's some DNA seems to refute this and yada yada, but I'm kind of fascinated with it. I was fascinated that they thought that there was a connection. So that kind of has piqued my interest.
That's more than fascinating to me because I literally came back 2 weeks ago from Tanzania and spent some time with the Maasai
Okay.
community. I did not ask any Jewish questions. Nobody asked me or made that connection. I was trying to get away from Jewish, which is barely almost impossible in my life.
Yes.
But I did see that dancing. We did connect with some of the women and the community and the way they live, which is just fascinating. So
Right.
by all means, I would 100% encourage you to explore that.
I'm interested. I have to go spend a chunk of time there, and at the moment, but I appreciate the question. Whoever asked it, thank you, because I had, again, I sort of filed it in the back of my head, but now it's kind of moving forward. So
Well,
Google it. You'll see. See what you think.
if it should come to be, our deputy editor asked that question. So
Thank you,
so
Deputy
she's
Editor.
going to get credit. Let
Okay,
me hear
thank
that.
you. It'll be a long Genesis.
There are a couple questions that I suspect you may not want to touch about a little bit more about the detective. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the detective or not so much?
It depends upon the question about the detective. Like
Well,
what
maybe you can guess what the questions are. Two questions related to the detective.
um what role does he play in the book, or why is he what is his role in Laura's life?
That's the question.
Yeah, maybe you have to read the book for that. They have a complicated history. But she has been very attached to him for many years. So
Right. Okay. There's so much more to talk about. Really, you've shared a lot personally, your process as an author, your insights into Italian jewelry, and just your whole evolution as a writer. And I'm really glad we had this opportunity for you to be with us here tonight.
thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate it. It was actually a delight. I mean, it was a delight, not even actually, it was a delight. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who came, and I'm grateful.
And I'm going to ask that everybody stay on for a little bit because, including you, Mary, because I want to give a few announcements about upcoming programs. On Thursday, March 26th at 7 p.m., back to our usual time, I'll be hosting Allegra Goodman, the acclaimed author who, in her latest book, This Is Not About Us, has returned to her Jewish storytelling and her keen observations of the idiosyncrasies of contemporary Jewish families. You're not going to want to miss that. You're also not going to want to miss Thursday, April 23rd at 7 p.m. also. I'll be joined by renowned journalist and author Matti Friedman for a conversation about his new book, Out of the Sky, Heroism and Rebirth in Nazi Europe, about the enduring relevance of Hannah Senesh and her ill-fated mission to rescue Jews during World War II, a mission that became a Zionist legend as well as the challenges Israel faces today. If you haven't yet discovered our podcast, wherever you find your podcast, be sure to do so. You'll still want to register for these live events to be part of the real-time conversation and be able to ask questions of our guests. But in case you miss it, and in case you want to share this recording and the podcast with others in your life, you can listen to it while taking a walk, commuting, cooking dinner. And in addition to listening and sharing today's conversation with Mary Morris, you'll find earlier conversations with Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, Yossi Klein Halevi and Lee Yaron, Maya Arad, Mayim Bialik, Dara Horn, and Ayelet Sabari, just to name a few. So you can find it wherever you get your podcasts or on the podcast page of hadassah.org, where you can sign up for alerts to learn when new episodes drop. I want to thank Leah Finkelstein, our senior editor, who helped plan and implement this program, along with the magazine's digital editor, Ariel Kaplan, who both promoted and produced it. And a shout out, as always, to our partners in the engagement and marketing and communications divisions who always play an important role in making these events happen. Everyone who registered will get a follow-up email with links to a recording and the podcast, more information about our upcoming events, and ways to donate to Hadassah and become a member of the organization. Thanks so much to you, Mary, for spending this time with us. We really look forward to your next book. We wait anxiously and wish you luck with that and your continuing Jewish journey.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And to everyone in the audience, thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.